Welcome to the Albany Book Festival online, presented by the New York State Writers Institute at the University of Albany. You can learn more about the festival and find direct links to independent booksellers at our festival webpage, albanybookfestival.com. Follow us on social media and hear from more videos from the Writers Institute.
Welcome to the third annual Albany Book Festival at the State University of New York at Albany. I'm Mark Koplik, Assistant Director of the New York State Writers Institute. We're thrilled to be here today with Noam Chomsky and Robert Pollin, Professor Emeritus at MIT and founder of the field of modern linguistics. Noam Chomsky is the author of over 100 books, one of America's most influential thinkers on the political left. He's still a firebrand at the age of 91 and a guiding light for progressive movements all over the world. Bill Moyers calls him America's leading dissenter. Robert Pollin is an influential progressive economist and distinguished university professor of economics at UMass-Amherst. He served as consultant on renewable energy to the US Department of Energy during the Obama administration. Foreign Policy magazine named him among its 100 leading global thinkers in 2013. Together, they are the authors of the new book, Climate Crisis and the Global Green New Deal, The Political Economy of Saving the Planet, published in September of 2020. The new book asserts that the climate crisis is every bit as menacing as the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. The only way to save us is the creation of a green economy based on renewable energy and sustainable growth, a green economy that leaves no one behind and provides a massive expansion of decent jobs for all. Daniel Ellsberg calls the book, quote, a survival manual for civilization. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
I'd like to start by asking you both, Noam is 91, just beginning his 10th decade here on planet Earth. And of course, Bob is quite a bit younger.
Not that much. Not that much younger.
But if you were young people today, starting lives and careers, what paths might you be considering?
Well, shall I start?
Sure.
At your age? Okay. You happen to be, young people today happen to be living in a unique moment of human history. There's a confluence of crises all happening right now, each of them extremely urgent. None of them can be delayed. The least menacing of all of them is the one that we're all focusing on. The pandemic. It is very serious. Will be immense costs. Ultimately, will emerge from it in some form. Another and probably worse pandemic will be coming, unless there's preparation for it right now. Could really be massively destructive. That's the least of the crises. The other three were registered very clearly just at the moment when the pandemic was striking by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. As most of you know, every year scientists, other analysts get together and try to assess the security system for the security situation of the world. This is every year that Trump has been in office. They've registered it on the doomsday clock, certain distance from midnight. Midnight means termination. Every year that Trump's been in office, the minute hand has moved closer to midnight. A couple of years ago, it reached the closest point it had ever been. This last January, they abandoned minutes. They moved to seconds, 100 seconds to midnight. They give three reasons, three major crises. The one is the increasing severe threat of nuclear war, greatly increasing, especially as Trump dismantles the last shreds of the arms control regime. The second is the threat of environmental catastrophe, which is inexorable. We're sitting here talking about the pandemic and other things. Meanwhile, the polar ice sheets are melting. That's not going to stop. The effects of it are irreversible in any reasonable amount of time. There are other dire warnings that are very severe. We have a short period of time to address these crises. Can be done, but not for a long time, can't wait long. And that's the second of the major crises. The third that they mention may sound surprising. It's the destruction of functioning democracy. Sounds like it doesn't belong, but it does, because the only way the other crises can be addressed is by an informed, engaged public taking its fate into its own hands. Otherwise, we're doomed. Now, how serious is that third crisis, deterioration of democracy? Well, I'll quote somebody, virtually verbatim. The West is facing severe crises. If Trump is reelected, it will be terminal. A couple of years ago, you might have seen that on a sign that some guy is showing on a street corner, telling you to find Jesus quickly. Now it's moved right to the center. I happen to be quoting probably the most respected economic political correspondent in the world, very sober, serious, Martin Wolf of the Financial Times, the world's leading financial journal, right to the center. He happens to be talking primarily about this destruction of democracy, but the same holds for everything else. That's what you're facing, okay? You have a certain amount of time to do something about it. Unless you are engaged and active, you'll basically be helping us move to termination, not only for organized human life, but for huge masses of species generally. Now, the good news is it can be dealt with. Every one of these problems can be dealt with. We even know how, but it's not going to happen by itself. Those are the questions that I think young people have to face.
And given the fact that young people are certainly preoccupied with current, more visible crises, and just with the normal challenges of being a young person, finding a place in the world, finding love and acceptance, finding a career. How should students, how can students find the motivation for themselves, and how can they find the inspiration to motivate others, given all the distractions?
Well, the inspiration is pretty easy. You see it in front of you. So take a Sunrise Movement, for example, group of young activists, small group of young activists. They they occupied congressional offices. They got some support from some of the young representatives who were swept in on the Sanders wave. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for the most part. She joined up with a senator from Massachusetts, Ed Markey, who's been very much involved in climate issues. And they succeeded in putting the concept of a Green New Deal on the legislative agenda. A couple of years ago, it was so far on the fringe, you couldn't hear it. Now, the concept, I said, they didn't give the details, but the idea that the concept is there right in front of us is crucially significant. Then comes the problem of working it out. Now, a Green New Deal is an absolute essential for human survival. We don't have it, we're toast. It's now on the legislative agenda. They didn't stop there. They continued. This is a small group of young people. They joined with Bernie Sanders in entering the planning for the coming election. They have succeeded in pressing the Democratic Party program way to the progressive side of anything within living memory, including the climate change program, which they mostly wrote and endorsed, which isn't enough, but it's way beyond anything else. A $2 trillion commitment to work on addressing the critical climate issues, efforts to move forward the point at which we reach no emissions. All of this was unimaginable a couple of years ago. It's a small group of young people. If that's not inspiring, I don't know what is. Yes, these are things that people can do, many more, all over, wherever you happen to be. And that's only one of the issues. There are others as well.
Bob, did you want to talk about how young people might want to connect with this issue? Yeah.
Well, first of all, if we take what, as Noam described, the urgency of the moment, the severity of the crisis, the fact that we are really dealing with a realistic prospect of ending human life on Earth as we know it, as a possibility, really that's one alternative. But building the Green New Deal is the only viable alternative, as Noam said. Building the Green New Deal is a project. It is a massive project, and it is going to create all kinds of demands on young people and opportunities for young people, things for people to get involved in. Building the Green New Deal, as I define it, fundamentally is really about two specific things in terms of the energy sector. It's about raising energy efficiency standards dramatically through investments and substituting in renewable energy, solar and wind primarily, for fossil fuel energy. Well, doing those things, if we're talking about 2 trillion, actually the number I think should be a lot higher than 2 trillion, but it's going to create a lot of jobs, and it's going to create a lot of jobs for people who want to work in clean energy, but it's going to create a lot of jobs across the board. It's going to create a lot of jobs for people that are going to be delivering solar panels, as well as the people that are going to be putting up the solar panels, as well as the people that are going to be designing the solar panel. It is going to create a lot of opportunity for people to start small-scale co-ops, enterprises. I mean, as opposed to massive-scale utilities, you can, if you have solar panels on your roof, you are your own little utility. And you can do better through cooperative enterprises. And people are doing that, not so much yet in the United States, but somewhat. And so those kinds of opportunities are going to be emerging. I would say on the political front, Noam highlighted the Sunrise Movement, and they have been tremendous, because I myself have been working in this area for a long time with a lot of old people like me, and yeah, the level of interest was, you can chart it. It was kind of hovering at 2, 3, 4%, and then when they did the sit-in in Congress, all of a sudden everybody heard about the Green New Deal. I'd already written 2 or 3 studies with the title Green New Deal on them, and 17 people cared about them, but it was really the enthusiasm of young people. I would say that in terms of specific things that college students can do right now in their colleges, well, insist that your college get off of fossil fuels, starting now. At UMass, the students did it. I was on the committee of the grown-ups, the old people's committee, the faculty and the administrators, and we were talking and talking and talking for a year, and then the students had to sit in. Luckily, we have a very progressive, open-minded chancellor. The students had to sit in, said we have to get off of fossil fuels in 10 years. And the chancellor said, I agree. And he told our committee, you figure out how to do it, but I agree with the students. Well, of course, we adults said, you can't do that. It's not possible. And the chancellor said, figure it out. Just figure it out. And if it's really, truly not possible, come back to me. But I want you to figure it out. And don't worry about the cost. Now, and UMass is one place, but it's a big institution. If that spread at, SUNY Albany and every other large public university like that, it's going to create a new dynamic in the entire energy industry. And just as a note on that, of course, we've already had a very successful, in some ways, divestment movement at universities and religious institutions. I have to say the divestment movement does not have the same impact. It is really indirect. It means, all it in the end means is that the UMass, for example, sells its shares of fossil fuel stocks, and then somebody else buys them. That's not the same as saying we're not going to use fossil fuels, period. We don't care what happens on the stock market. And so I think that is an important movement students can get involved in, like the first day, well, under the pandemic, if people aren't showing up, but when they show up again.
Some students may have difficulty imagining themselves into a new green economy. They may have majors and career goals that seem on the surface of things to be unrelated to a green economy. Majors like cybersecurity or music or psychology, etc. How would you advise them to imagine specific roles for themselves in an emerging green economy?
Yeah.
Well, everybody, no matter what you are, truck driver, secretary, research scientist, that's not 100% of your life. There's another part of your life in which you should be engaged in participating in the broader society, its concerns, its needs, its prospects. And that part of your life, you're free to decide what to do with. Much of the main work on crucial human issues has been done by people who have full-time professional lives on something else. Furthermore, as Bob just pointed out, virtually any professional life that you're involved in is in some manner, not insignificant manner, related to a Green New Deal. A Green New Deal doesn't just mean let's get off fossil fuels. It means let's build a new society, a society directed to human needs, not to gain profit for 0.1% of the population. Just about whatever you're involved in, it participates in that. It's hard to think of anything that doesn't. Every example you mentioned certainly does in some fashion or other. So there are many options. There are the options of being very directly involved, like say Sunrise Movement, in energy issues. There are the possibilities of working to develop the kind of society that can survive, improve lives, enter into the new age that must be coming with sustainable energy, the kinds of lifestyles, social arrangements, economic arrangements, and others that are part of the background within which this new society can move forward to save us from the disasters that are impending.
Yep, Bob. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes, for one thing, the building a new economy is going to mean transforming social relations as well. I mean, in the narrowest sense, as I said before, the mere opportunity to not have basically everyone in society dependent on massive oil companies and massive utilities to purchase energy itself creates opportunities. I mean, Noam was the inaugural speaker at the economics building at UMass 3 years ago. It is a net zero building, net zero energy building. Meaning, you know, effectively, we are off the fossil fuel economy. We're not truly off it, but basically, we're well on the road to doing that. And therefore, you know, effectively, we are our own utility right there in that building. And so the momentum to build those kinds of things, you know, it's a great opportunity for construction workers. It's a great opportunity for people who want to learn different skills in the areas of engineering or trucking or all the other skills that get involved in creating just our building structure. And then that feeds into other areas, public transportation. The one and only time I ever spoke at a Federal Reserve event, it was in the Federal Reserve Bank in Cleveland 10 years ago during the last economic crisis. And they invited me to talk about the green economy. And I said, here's what you can do. You're the Fed. You can hire people to retrofit buildings right now. There's a lot of entry-level opportunities, and you will lower energy costs for people throughout the community. And it's going to create jobs and make it happen. You can do it. Of course, they didn't, but it would be easy just in the area of retrofitting old buildings, and the Fed could do it right now and create hundreds of thousands of jobs in the process. So these are jobs for people, entry-level jobs, as well as people with more experience. So those are ways to integrate people into the big project.
Let me just add one word to that. When Bob says the Fed can do it, that also means you can do it. The Fed is not going to follow these principles on its own any more than the Democratic National Committee would have accepted a climate policy on its own. They're doing it because people are banging at their doors. Usual image is the peasants are coming with their pitchforks. They notice that. So you, wherever you are, can be instrumental in helping create the popular movements which will get the Fed to listen and get others to listen and to change. And you can change these arrangements as well. They're not graven in stone. They could be improved. They could be something much better than the Fed. All of these possibilities are there, but not if people don't do anything about it. Lots of opportunities, have to grasp them. Actually, one of my favorite comments from my favorite philosopher, couple hundred years ago, mid-18th century, David Hume, has an important book, one of the first books of what we call political science, First Principles of Government, Foundations of Government. He opens it up by saying, power is in the hands of the governed, the people who are governed. They have power. Any kind of state, whether it's more or less free or military, whatever it is, rules on the basis of consent. It's fragile. If the governed remove their consent, it'll erode. That's where power is, but you have to grasp it. You're kind of trained from infancy to be passive and obedient. You don't have to agree. Plenty of people throughout history have refused to agree, and they're the ones who've carried us forward. And you're now in a position where you can make that choice.
Do you have any advice for how students can exercise that power in this time of isolation, during quarantine, disruption of their lives, and particularly how they can persuade or attempt to persuade others of the merits of a Green New Deal, of the urgency of this issue, folks who may not be aware or who may have accepted contrary views?
Well, I think that, at the level of communication, though we are all isolated, young people are probably spending more time than ever online reading, and communicating. And this is an issue in the forefront, brought forth by people like the Sunrise Movement and Greta Thunberg. And we've had, in September, we had the biggest climate strike in history, and it was global. It was young people. And so we have to maintain that pressure, even if it's, through the internet. I would note, in Europe, the head of the central bank there, Christine Lagarde, speaking of the Financial Times, gave an interview to the Financial Times recently in which she said, as the head of the European Central Bank, which is the rough equivalent of the Fed in terms of its level of power, and nobody else is close, she said she's going to make climate the most important issue that she has to deal with, which is itself extraordinary. I mean, central banks don't deal with environment, but at least she recognizes that this is at the level of a severe crisis, and that in the end, a lot of it has to do with moving money to the right people and the right activities, and she's acknowledging them. Now, in Europe, they have this thing that they're calling the European Green Deal. They don't want to call it the Green New Deal for whatever reason. And on paper, all of its goals are perfectly consistent with really what we need to achieve. The problem is that, when you read the details, the amount of money that they've committed and the projects that they've committed to is, woefully inadequate. And so I'm sure, and Christina Lagarde said, well, now that I'm in this position, I can't look my children and grandchildren in the face unless I take action on this. So that, so far, so good. But what the, activists, students have to do is really push so that, we old people don't get away with, nice sounding platitudes that go nowhere. And that's why I said, one example at SUNY Albany, UMass, insists that we get off fossil fuels. I mean, the students at UMass have done it, and the chancellor is backing them. So that would be something that everybody can do right now, every student.
We're coming up on time, but I'd like to know if there's any reason for students to be excited or optimistic about the future, and about being here at this moment in history.
Reason to be optimistic. Just envision what life could be like in a society that's oriented towards meeting people's needs instead of enriching a tiny sector of the population and imposing rules and demands that everyone else has to conform to. That's a wonderful picture, and it's within our grasp, and we know how to proceed towards it. Bob's given some examples, could easily expand them. They're all in front of you. You have a choice. It's important. You can't overemphasize the fact that this is a unique moment in human history. The current generation must decide whether organized human society is going to survive, and if it does, in what form. There's no way to avoid that choice. If you sit back and say, I'm not going to do anything about it, you're voting for the worst to come, for destruction. And the opportunities to do something are exciting, challenging. It's a grim responsibility, but a wonderful challenge. So this generation is facing problems that never existed before, but also exciting challenges that never existed before. And you can grasp them. There are ways to proceed. That's what's in front of you. The one thing you can't do is refuse to make a choice, because that is making a choice, saying, let's race to disaster.
The new book, Climate Crisis and the Global Green New Deal, The Political Economy of Saving the Planet by Noam Chomsky and Robert Pollin. There's a link on this page to purchase the book. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom.
Thank you.
This book festival is made possible with the support of the McGuire Family Endowment at the Writers Institute, the University at Albany Foundation, the Office of the President of UAlbany, the Peacock Family Foundation, the Capital District Library Council, Stuyvesant Plaza, Chet and Karen Opalka, Charles Toohey and Alice Green, Pernilla Dake, Elizabeth Ruthman, and Betsy Lopez. If you appreciate our programming and would like to support the Writers Institute, you can find out how at nyswritersinstitute.org.